And I think in that sense, we really want to recognize the different realities that all of us are in. And I think that has helped us recognize that post-pandemic, right, when all of this is behind us, hopefully sooner than later, that we can't just go back to doing things the way we used to, right? The pandemic, I think, has shown us from a systems level all the inequities that we need to address. And I think it's also helped us understand the things that we do on a day-to-day basis. And how is this going to shift that landscape for us when it comes to teaching and learning down the road? So today, I think we hope to spend some time thinking about the lessons that we've learned and how we might translate those lessons into supporting our students in not just through this pandemic, but beyond as well. So with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Tom.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. So yeah, I mean, I'll just echo the same sentiments that Brian mentioned about this kind of opportunity to kind of come together and think about the kind of current situation that we're in. I think because of the kind of nature of this event and the way in which it's kind of framed, we're going to hear a lot about, you know, kind of compassion and empathy and kind of having compassion for our students in the kind of situations that they're in and having empathy for their situations as well. And rightly so. I mean, many of you have kind of endured some really challenging situations over the last, let's say, 6 or 8 months. And it's good to come together and share those challenges. And also, I would encourage everybody to kind of think about your successes as well, right? The things that you've kind of learned about yourself, the things that you have learned about yourself that might kind of translate to other people. And, you know, many of you know each other beyond this kind of pandemic situation, right? You've had classes together, et cetera. And so, you know, you may be able to share something about yourself that may translate nicely to somebody else, and you know that kind of situation because you know these people. I would just maybe also encourage everyone to think a little bit more kind of broadly, right? That if we all walk away from this situation just having more compassion and more empathy for people in their situations, I think that's a good thing. Of course, the world needs more of that, right? But I wonder whether we could do something more with this situation, right? With this event, whether we can maybe incorporate a few other things. So maybe I'll challenge you to all think about words here, not just compassion and empathy, but also maybe innovation and ingenuity, right? Like the ways in which maybe our department and the department leadership, right, could put in place, you know, initiatives or programs or strategies. Maybe we can walk away from this event with maybe a series of action items, right, that we can as a department and as a kind of department within the department leadership, et cetera, can actually kind of think about solutions that maybe be able to be kind of implemented more broadly. And so normally those types of questions get brought up at the end, you know, like the last 5 minutes when everybody's just about out the door. And so I wanted to kind of plant that idea early and see whether or not, as you're listening to the panelists, you might be able to kind of think about some of those types of concepts, the kind of department-wide kind of concepts that may be able to be implemented for either later on in this semester or certainly in the spring, right? So, so with that, I think I'll hand it back over to Brian and to introduce the panelists.
Great, thanks, Tom. So today we are privileged really to have 4 panelists who have generously agreed to share their perspectives on teaching, learning, and coping in the era of COVID-19. We have Marley Fay, who's going to start us off, and Marley's second-year MS student, and she's also in the student government here at CU Denver, and very active, particularly in the food sustainability sort of realm. And then we're going to follow her presentation with Maggie P. And Maggie P is a first-year MS student and also on the Graduate Student Executive Council. So thank you for representing in some sense, also the first year students, whom we are very excited to hear from. And then that's going to be followed by Nick Russell, who is second year MA student, working full time and trying to finish up his thesis as well. And who has also been, I think, a TA now for 3 semesters, very much like Marley too. So a lot of experience there. And speaking of experience, our fourth presenter, Mandy Rees, is a former MA student, graduated in spring, and is now transitioned to being an instructor in the department. And also brings this unique perspective of having recently been in sort of a learning position and is now shifted over to a teaching role. So we are very excited to have all 4 presenters here because they bring, I think, a really diverse set of perspectives for us to learn about. And I think that will hopefully lead to some really rich conversation. So the format, I think, for today is we're gonna ask each presenter to chat for about 5 minutes, and I'll keep time here. And then we'll open it to the group for questions, maybe specific questions to what the presenter was talking about. And that will have about 10 minutes per presenter. That should take us about 40 to 45 minutes. And then we will have a series of, we'll have breakout rooms for a couple of minutes. This will give all of us an opportunity to sort of share our own experiences in small groups. And then we'll reconvene for the last 20, 25 minutes as a large group. And that should wrap up our panel. All good? Fantastic. All right, without further ado, Marley, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Brian, for that really nice introduction. Firstly, I'm just very grateful to be here with all of you and have the opportunity to speak on teaching, learning, and coping in COVID-19. Obviously, this transition to remote teaching and learning has not been very easy, especially during a global pandemic, but I just wanted to thank the GES for hosting this opportunity to learn from our experiences and continue to navigate this unprecedented situation. So again, my name is Marley. I am a second year graduate student in the MS program. I'm also a 3rd semester lab instructor for the Intro to Environmental Science lab with Dr. Duster. And I'm very heavily involved with student government. I am the chair of SACAB, which is a tri-institutional committee that oversees policies and initiatives that happen on all 3 of our institutions. That aside, I feel that I've had what I now consider to be the privilege of experiencing graduate school both in person and remotely, and both for teaching and for learning. This is the first semester of my entire academic career that I've ever taken and taught exclusively remote classes. And I've really gotten to know and get really intimate with my own personal space, as well as the personal spaces of my students, which is what I'd like to talk to you about today. So hopefully this doesn't sound too much like rambling, but I like to think of myself as somebody who wears a lot of different hats. When I used to come to campus to attend class, I would put on my student hat. When it was time to teach lab, immediately as I walked into that lab classroom, I became a teacher. I put on my teacher hat. When I got to go home at the end of the day on my bike ride home, or as soon as I was walking in the door, I'd put on my homebody hat. And I know that hat is a very silly metaphor here, but what I really mean to say is that so much of my identity as a student is associated with my physical place. For example, when I was in North classroom, I knew it was time to identify as a teacher or student. And when I was home, I knew that it wasn't time to identify as a student, but that I could and would identify with that part of my personality as soon as I was back on campus. So I think that you get where I'm going with this, that in the wake of COVID-19, the ability to change our location has ceased to be a reality. And what I feel many other students are struggling right now is to separate our personal identities from our academic identities, because both of these identities are expected to exist within the same physical place. I'm having trouble figuring out when to take my hats off and put them on, because I don't have that set schedule and location to help inform me of when that is appropriate. So sometimes I'm wearing my student hat well into the evening, which I know cannot be healthy. COVID-19 has taken a campus away from student, staff, and faculty, which is understandable. From what I understand, there have been conversations about reopening campus for the spring semester, which I understand has been a pretty firm no. But what I think is missed in a lot of these conversations is that by shedding campus doors, something that is taken away from students, staff, and faculty is the ability to separate and compartmentalize home responsibilities from their work and academic responsibilities. At this point, we are expected to teach, learn, and cope, or any combination thereof, in the same physical space, which is really, really difficult. And I think for students in particular, this difficulty in learning and coping is compounded by the fact that they might be in a physical place that is not conducive to learning or coping. For example, I had a student last semester who was living in Campus Village, and they were forced to return home mid-semester, where they shared a home with their single parent and 3 siblings under the age of 10. This semester, I had a fellow instructor express to me when their child, who is at home with them all day now, has a bad day, then that bad day is emotionally grafted onto them too. The point is that home life is something that we used to be able to separate, but now that we're all constantly in our homes, our personal environment is now explicitly tied to our academic life. Understanding that our students, staff, and faculty have lives outside of school has always been something that's been acknowledged on a very fringe level of our focus, but it needs to be brought more into the center of our focus moving forward, because at this point, it's all in our faces or in our cameras. I can literally see you all at home. So I believe that moving forward into another semester or potentially year of this pandemic, as instructors, we need to actively promote this idea that not only are we instructors or people who impart knowledge, that we're also people capable of compassion and empathy, and that we are concerned about what home life looks like for our students. As students, I think we need to open up and be more communicative with our instructors and let them know about circumstances in our lives that are impacting our ability to engage with our academic work. And just like I, as a student, would hope that my professors would be understanding of my circumstances, as an instructor, I would hope that my students recognize my humanity as well and understand that I'm not very different from them. And lastly, I know that it's very easy to say that we need to do such and such or be more compassionate, but we need to come together as we are now and create some actionable changes that would support our students and faculty, because up until this point, we've had the privilege of being abstract, but at this point, we can no longer, in fairness to our communities and students, be just that. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Marley. Right at 5 minutes. Fantastic. I'm channeling Peter here, so that's awesome. Questions for Marley, and if you have broad questions, maybe keep that till the end of the panel when we have a big group discussion. But if there are specific questions for what Marley just described, that'd be great. We'll love to hear from you. Amanda.
Hey, Marley, that was great. Thank you. I often worry about being too invasive into student lives, and I was just curious how you personally balance that as both a student and a teacher, because it's just something I think about a lot, because I also find myself being much more I mean, I'm pretty casual as it is. I find myself being more casual online and also sharing more things about my personal life. And I was just some comments about that would be appreciated. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know. I think that coming from being like an actively as a student and an instructor, it's really, really nice to hear about your instructors or professors' lives and their personal lives. It kind of helps bridge that gap of humanity there. Not that instructors are lacking in humanity, but you know, as students, we most of the time. But you know, as students, we kind of look up to our professors as sort of being like this impartial imparting of knowledge role, when realistically maybe we should start seeing our instructors as just being people. Regarding like being too invasive in students' lives, I don't think it's too invasive to ask, but to expect students to respond to you is another thing entirely. I mean, I have students who I've reached out to who just have never reached back out to me, and that's okay. That's their decision. But I think that it's perceived that there is a fine line between being too personable or too invasive, but and then surely there is, but I think it's a little bit like that line is not as fine as we tend to think that it is. And I think that bridging a more human connection with our students is really important right now in terms of community and understanding.
Other questions? Okay.
Marley, I wonder if you could comment just a little bit on like the propensity for our students to leave their kind of video cameras off, and whether, I mean, I know this is speculative, right? But whether that is because perhaps they're not paying attention, or they're engaged in other activities, or maybe they're, I don't know, playing their Xboxes or something, for all I know. But whether perhaps some of that might be just an indication that our students perhaps don't want us in their space, right? That maybe whether it's kind of embarrassment or privacy or whatever kind of you might want to assign to it, but whether students, what to do in those kind of situations, perhaps where again, we're looking at a bunch of black screens, but not quite knowing why, you know?
Yeah, that's a really, I thought about that a lot. That's a really tough question, because it could be any combination of all three. You know, they could very well be in a place that they don't feel comfortable with you being in their space, because that's something that we've never had to do before. I've never held a lecture in my living room until like this year, and I think that is a really hard thing to overcome for some people. Honestly, I tend to err on the side of being more forgiving. I try not to assign malice or malpractice from my students, so I do just assume that they are you know, they don't want to turn on their cameras because they don't feel comfortable with it. I'm sure to ask at the beginning of every lecture, like, if you do feel comfortable keeping your camera on, I would really appreciate it. If you don't feel comfortable with that, I totally understand. You're welcome to keep your cameras off. I think just giving them that option is really nice. And then to kind of interlace that with asking broad questions to the class and kind of checking in with them to make sure that they are present. Maybe not like physically, they don't have to be physically present, but just to make sure that they're paying attention, because it's a hard line to follow. I think ultimately it will have some students who aren't paying attention, but you are going to have students that genuinely don't feel comfortable, and you can't penalize them because of the actions of another student.
Thank you. Peter.
Yeah, I'm just kind of curious. This is really a question to the other instructors here, because honestly, I have no idea what the standard is anymore. What do people do with regard to your policy pertaining to cameras? I mean, does anybody ask your students to turn their cameras on, or are you agnostic? Or I'm just curious, because I mean, we've got a room that's full of instructors for the most part.
So very quickly, if you don't mind, when I'm giving a live lecture and I'm recording it, I will often ask people to turn their videos off, because the recording becomes very large at that point. So if I'm going to be distributing that up on Canvas, I don't want to have something that's 270 meg up there that they have to download. It's, you know, and so it's not that I don't want to see them. It's that it makes it super inconvenient to download a file that big.
Yeah, and I suppose you're also essentially publishing something with people's houses in the footage. True. Ultimately. True. That's a good point. I mean, personally, I encourage them to turn it on. I don't require them to do that because I feel like it, I mean, I know some students, you know, it's kind of a difficult balance to strike because I will be sometimes when they do have it on, I can see them like laughing and obviously engaging with something else, you know, which I don't want. I want to discourage, but on the other hand, I don't want to require people to put people in a position that doesn't make them comfortable either.
Peter, maybe you're just a funny guy.
Yeah, I know.
You know, I mean,
This is
think that might
applied
be-
spatial statistics. I try to make it funny, but it's
I'm
hard
sure you do.
hard
I'm sure
material
you
to
do.
work with.
Well, it's interesting too, because, and we can come back to this at the end of the panel, but your point, Marley, about trying to recognize the humanity, right, in both the teaching and the learning process. Maybe as I'm thinking about it, maybe part of that humanity is recognizing that it's okay if students are distracted every now and then as I'm giving a lecture, because that's part of being human. I don't think it's fair to ask someone to be 100% in a space, mental space, for a 2 hour and 45-minute seminar that I'm giving as well. So it's interesting to think about what it means to embrace that humanity in the context of this pandemic. So let's maybe think about that and come back to it at the end. But let's move on perhaps to our next presenter, and that would be Maggie P. All yours, Maggie.
Hey everyone, I'm Maggie again. I'm a first year MS student and a first semester TA. So it is NTA ever, by the way. This has been a really interesting experience, not only to be able to engage with students that I haven't had the opportunity to do so, but do it online. So it has both been challenging and really rewarding. And I also thank everybody for giving me the opportunity to talk here about it some more. So my topic is going to be looking at mental health, mostly in terms of social interaction. Obviously, we live in a day where it's really limited, and especially when it comes to being on campus and interacting with students, it's really becoming an issue. So this is really important to me because in my undergrad career, I kind of put taking care of myself on the back burner for a while. And it really started to become a problem to where it was an issue socializing with other people, like being my best student, like really just putting my best foot forward became really harder as it became larger of a problem. So, and I say this just to emphasize that without taking care of your mental health, it can be very difficult to learn, teach, and cope when life becomes difficult, i.e. the pandemic in this time. So if we do not feel emotionally fulfilled due to a lack of social interaction or communication between our students, it can be difficult to gauge how a class is going, like we were saying earlier, with or without the video, or if it's being effective, if the students feel like they're learning from the course, depending on the format. I think it's really important to be creative, to receive feedback, which includes creating polls, leading discussions with topics that can spark debate and interesting conversation. As a TA interacting with students in the chat, I think leaving comments on their tests and maybe like of praise or leading discussion in groups with interesting conversations encourages this atmosphere of connection with the TA and the teacher as well, even if there isn't like an interaction of being there socially directly. One of the most useful phrases that I think I got from an undergrad professor was, "This isn't a test, it's a conversation." So I think really creating that atmosphere of not having a lot of pressure, especially where the topic might be not something that the student particularly knows a lot about or feels that they could not have the right answer. So I think it's really important to just always have this kind of support, even as a teacher or a TA. And even this could even be in emails. So just kind of emphasizing that you value their answer and you value their questions. As a student in the pandemic and a graduate student in the pandemic, even as my first year, I think as a student, I've never been on campus before, so which is kind of silly to think about, but it can be difficult for me to feel connected to other students in the program, as just in the first couple of weeks, I could really tell that it was different from my undergrad experience. But I think something that has really helped me is the ability to be in breakout rooms with interesting topics to discuss. Even if it was just a breakout group of like 2 or 3 people, I could really have this interaction that I couldn't necessarily have in lecture when I'm sitting right next to somebody. Let's see. I also think valuing the way that I participate in a class as an accomplishment or is important, just because, you know, when you go to lecture, you're on campus, you go home from lecture, you feel like you were productive and that you did a good job being in class that day. So I think sitting on a computer instead of being in lecture or campus can feel like I'm not really being productive, but changing this perspective can really benefit your mental health in general. So it's really just valuing the little things when it comes to stuff like this. So, and then we're going to move on to coping. So coping can be difficult now that our options are so limited with little to no social interaction outside of class. I think it's the activities that, a few activities that have really benefited me the most are exercising and getting outside more often, where I'm not necessarily engaging with other people, but it really helps me to get out of this mindset where I'm at the computer and sitting at the computer all day, and just having that as a refreshment really helps me present like a better mindset going into a lecture where I feel like I'm refreshed and I'm not like the zombie sitting at a computer all day. Also being able to play with pets. I know that sounds silly, but just like I have this Australian Shepherd, and just playing fetch with him, he is so goofy, and it can really like light up your day and really bring value in ways that maybe so you're engaging with somebody socially, you have that absence and you can fill it with like a pet or something like that. Something that's also been really important for me is connecting with friends and family, even just texting. I feel like when I really haven't been around anybody for a long time, even just reaching out to my friends and family, maybe on a weekly basis, just checking in, it can really make you feel more supported rather than not seeing them all the time. And that's really everything I have.
Awesome. Thank you, Maggie. Questions for Maggie? Yeah, Lisa.
Hi, thanks for that. Sorry, when I go off camera, it's because there's screaming in my house and I have a young daughter. So I guess my question is, you were talking about the sort of retraction of opportunities to socially connect, and I totally feel that, and I totally hear that. And I guess my question is, have you found in online teaching and learning any new kind of opportunities outside the breakout rooms, or any sort of new avenues you didn't anticipate?
Yeah, I think polling was actually really surprising, and the way that students can give you like their honest opinion without necessarily having their name tied to it, even if it was as simple as, does this information make sense? Like they don't necessarily have to turn on their camera or say it out loud. You know, they have the option to just simply push a button and make a contribution, like give their opinion back to you without having so much pressure. As a TA, I really like to interact with students in the chat room, especially I work with Dr. Brian Wee, and we have a lecture that has 80 students, I think, which can be really overwhelming, but also when they use the chat, of just interacting with them, even if it was like, that's a great comment. I think that students can definitely feel more supported in that way where they haven't necessarily felt so. But yeah, great question.
Yeah, Peter.
Thank you very much. I think that's really important feedback. I mean, I wonder how effective the breakout rooms are, and so it's great to hear feedback on that, as well as the polling. I hadn't thought of that as an important way to do this. For those of you who want to do that, by the way, Mentimeter for the instructors out there is really amazing. It's free. Go to like mentimeter.com and you can set up free anonymous polls. It's basically like an iClicker, but it's free. It's browser based and it works great for this kind of circumstance. But my question is, are there any other, and this goes to any student really, are there any other types of activities in addition to breakout rooms and polls? I think this is kind of Lisa's question again, but that help kind of engender this sense of community. I mean, in my case, I find it really hard to chat while I'm doing the class, you know, to use the chat room. But I was wondering if there were any other things that you guys have found effective for that.
That's a great question. I think it really depends on the topic in the lecture. And so, yeah, I lost my train of thought. I don't know. Can another student go?
And this is really for any students or teachers out there who have had experience with anything, not specifically the speaker. I saw Maggie Gillard raise her hand.
Other Maggie.
Other Maggie.
Yeah, I would just chime in and say in one of my classes, things that have worked really well for engagement and kind of letting us still collaborate together as students. I've had a professor use Google Slides during the lecture. And we put together this like rapid fire PowerPoint all together as a class. Each group works on a different slide. And then we get to go check out other group slides and learn from each other. We've also used Jamboard quite a bit in this class. So getting people's ideas right off the bat, kind of their first thoughts after a reading or something like that. And I think that that's really helpful. Oh, and Jamboard is a Google application. I wish Chris Christensen was here because she uses it quite a bit. And she's really, really good resource for all things Canvas, open discussion online and stuff like that. But Jamboard is an application you can add to your Chrome, Google Chrome. And it's essentially like, think of it like if you were to hang sticky notes all over your room and students could go write on the sticky notes their ideas for different categories, you can do that virtually with Jamboard and they get to put up their own sticky notes on different topics. Yes, there it is. Thanks, Peter. But yeah, so things like that have been super helpful for me personally as a student. I have a hard time, and as what Marley was saying, having a space for learning is really helps me. So being in the same place all day has been really challenging for me to keep my engagement during class. But things like that have really helped me from professors that add in all these different little aspects to keep us working together on things.
Thanks so much. I'll investigate that myself.
Yeah, and Peter, I'll just say too that of course it is difficult to do the typing in the chat if you are, you know, also lecturing at the same moment. But I do use the chat as like a one-way kind of, you know, toward me, and I don't respond in the chat, but oftentimes I'll respond during lecture, or if some kind of question comes up in the chat and, you know, there's a number of people that have the same kind of thing, then maybe I need to rehash that material a little bit more or something. So, and I just leave I have my screen set up so that my Zoom actually just takes up maybe 4/5 of my screen or something. And then I've got my participation list so that I can let people into from the waiting room or whatever. And then my chat box down at the bottom so I can just see that roll in as I'm lecturing. And it does take a little piece of my brain to do that, I guess, but nevertheless, it's helpful to realize like when you have not described something quite as well as you needed to or something. So.
Yeah, it's been great having Maggie P and also Nick, who's here as TAs in EMVS 1342. Especially with the group chat that Maggie was describing. I was giving a lecture once and I looked up and there was 75 threaded comments. And I thought, oh my God, how does someone keep track of all of that? And it's remarkable the job that the TAs are doing in this class together with Carolina Nera. So I think from a social interaction standpoint, I think that now that I'm describing this, that relationship, right, between TAs and instructors are also really important in building and creating a safe space, but also a space that students feel they can participate in these different ways. So that's, I think, another piece to supporting social interaction. It's us being able to socially interact that enables our students to socially interact as well. Yeah, so speaking of Nick, perhaps it's time to move on to our next presenter. So Nick, thank you again, and the floor is all yours.
Great, thanks, Dr. Wee. Yeah, so as Dr. Wee mentioned, my name's Nick. I'm a second year in the department in the MA program. And I've been a TA this is my third semester being a TA. And I think as a second year, I've been able, like Marley, I've been able to experience the pre-COVID times and now the transition to online learning. So what I'm going to talk about today, I'm also actually going to be talking about mental health, similar to Maggie, but from a sort of a different perspective. And I think what I have to say sort of bridges the gap between what Marley and Maggie talked about already. But I'm going to talk about sort of the mental health impacts of the situation, particularly as it relates to identifying as a student or identifying as an educator, and what that means for not just how you socially interact, but like how you even approach doing your schoolwork, how you even approach being an educator or a student in the first place. Yeah, so COVID obviously has totally changed what it means to be a student or an educator, not just physically remote versus in person, but I think the mental space that takes up has completely shifted as well. So as a TA, I think one of the main things for me is I definitely feel a little more distant from the students than I have before, which I think presents some challenges in the way I approach being a TA. It definitely takes more effort than when you're in person to make those connections and to try and be there for the students and provide resources for them. And so I think that requires a little extra effort, which can be difficult when there's so much other stuff happening in our lives currently. So I think just trying to be aware of that has been really important for me as I am a TA, and just trying to prep myself as I go into like leading a discussion group or something like that, just trying to be cognizant and aware of that I'm not just talking to a screen, I'm talking to individual students. Yeah, and I think one of the other things that's really stuck out to me as a TA is just the presence of like mental health resources for students, and how I think especially for first year students, those resources I think might seem really foreign or seem like they might not even know they exist. Like they've never walked by the counseling center, they've never been on campus to see that those resources exist. So it might never occur to them that they have someone to reach out to if they need help. So I think something that I want to implement going forward is just trying to make sure that students know that those resources are available as much as possible. And then from the side of the student, I think over the last half of spring semester, and then I took a summer class, and then now this fall, I think I've been realizing that this situation has totally transformed the way I see myself as a student. I think as when I was doing in-person classes, when that was normal to me, I wouldn't think twice about that. But so my focus was on doing well in class. It was on excelling. It was on getting the best grades possible. And now sometimes my focus is just to make it through the week, just to like be able to get my stuff done so I can sit down and take a breath if I can. So that's definitely totally changed my priorities going in as a student. Like obviously I still want to do well, but just being able to get things done seems to be so much harder to me now than it did before. And there's so much going on in the world, even outside of COVID, so much other stress to add on to all of that too. So I think it makes focusing on being a student and identifying as a student a lot more difficult. And I think me personally, dealing with the anxiety of it all is also really exhausting. Like that literally starts your fight or flight response, which is really tiring to deal with over time. So I just trying to be aware that that's something that some students are dealing with, is just the mental exhaustion of just trying to slog through not just school and the global situation, but just their own brains is sometimes really tough. And then I think Marley kind of hit the nail on the head when she talked about the breakdown of like different hats in the different spaces. And I think that's been the biggest challenge for me, is just there are no more barriers between where I do school, where I do work. Like where I work is the same place. I go to class is the same place. I do my homework, it's the same place. I watch TV, it's the same place I eat. It's just, to me, there's sort of like a double-edged sword to this. On one side, it's really difficult to focus on any one thing at once, because they can all sort of happen at once. And then the other side, it's really difficult to pull away from any of those one things. I think what I've dealt with is just putting so much pressure on myself to constantly be productive and get things done, because I've made this connection in my brain that now that I'm at home, I'm working. So if I'm at home later in the day and not working, I'm doing something wrong. Like I should still be working. And that's not healthy. But I think when everything's in the same place, those connections just get formed, and it's really tough to just let yourself take a break. Yeah, and I didn't realize, like Marley talked about, I didn't realize those spatial boundaries had such a big impact on my mental health and outlook on being a student. And one of the other things I've noticed is just trying to have any sense of accomplishment is also kind of difficult, just because I think part of that is the monotony of going through every single day kind of feels the same. So when you submit that assignment, it doesn't necessarily feel like that big of a deal. It's just, I've submitted that paper, I've submitted that lab. Okay, now what? Kind of, I don't really know why that happens, but that's just something I've noticed in myself. And then I think how these things inform our GS community, I think if what it means to be an educator and a student as an individual have shifted, then that means what it means to be a community also has shifted completely as well. And I definitely think there's some things that we can do to adapt to those changes. And I think Maggie mentioned some of these things a little bit as well, like celebrating your students, providing even just small bits of encouragement, or celebrating when they submit assignments. I think that might help with providing some sense of accomplishment. And then I also think emphasizing existing resources. I think a lot of times the resources just kind of get stuck on a syllabus and then forgotten. But I think really making a point to say, you have things available to help you if you need them, or you can talk to me if you need anything. And making that known throughout the semester, not just at the very beginning, might be helpful. And the last thing, something I've thought about a lot recently is how in undergrad, I never felt like mental health was, I guess, a good excuse for struggling with schoolwork. I always just thought I had to push through it. Like if I'm feeling really anxious or depressed, that's not a good excuse. That won't be seen as something worth taking into account by my professor. So I think taking that seriously is really important now. If school isn't disconnected from the rest of our lives anymore, then school should also take into account those other things. Mental health should be brought into school. Those other things should be brought into school, because nothing is concretely separated anymore. That's sort of the main thing that stuck out to me. And I think another main thing is understanding that it's different from everything. Everything I talked about is mostly from my own experience and things I've talked about with a few friends. But yeah, that's pretty much it.
Thank you, Nick. Questions for Nick? Alicia.
Thank you. And thank you all. This is such a great discussion and very important to be having. I'm so glad that this was organized. I like that both you, Nick, and Maggie also brought up the issue of productivity and feeling productive. I think that for a lot of us as sort of overachievers and Americans, productivity and actually feeling productive is really important in our day-to-day lives. And I'm just wondering, how do you, how do you make yourself feel productive, but also forgive yourself when you're not quite as productive as you would be in other circumstances?
Absolutely, that's a great question. I think to help myself feel productive, one of the things I do, it's really small, but I think it actually does help, is I make lists of everything I have to do, like every little thing, even if it's just read 1/3 of a reading I have to do for like next Wednesday, even something small like that. And just being able to check off those boxes so I can look at something that says, this is what I did today, basically. And sometimes it's not as, that list of check boxes is not as long as I'd like, but it's still something to say, I tried, I did my best, kind of. And I think also on the other side of your question is really, I think it's really important to disconnect your sense of like being a good person from productivity, I guess, you know? So just something I try and tell myself is just be kind to myself and just give myself a break every now and then. Give yourself a day to not do anything if you need to. Which can be hard to do, but I think it's worth it.
I have a question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Nicole. Please go ahead.
Nicole?
I was just thinking about the idea that you brought up, that it's okay to give yourself these like mental breaks, and how a lot of students, we fall into this like guilt trap, especially when we have this monotonous day to day, that because you aren't doing enough, you have these like negative self-talk that you kind of guilt yourself into thinking that you're not doing enough. And so it just creates a really negative feedback loop that sometimes is really hard to get out of.
Yeah, totally. It's definitely really tough to get out of. I wish I had a good answer to that, of how to do that.
I think just maybe not even just looking at school, but really taking into account, you know what, like I ate today, like I went outside for a little bit and then I came back and read, and like, that's awesome. Taking that into account and being like, that's pretty productive day, not just for school wise, but productive for myself. And I think it's important, like maybe you do have a really good day and you get a lot done that day and it feels awesome. And then the next day you don't feel so great. I really try not to compare those 2 days in value. I think that to keep those separate and that you really just did your best for that day is really important.
Excellent. Gregory, you had your hand up.
Well, I do, but I realize I also am cognizant of the fact that based on the schedule you put forward at the beginning, we're behind. So I can wait and talk about it in a group or later.
It's part of the whole pandemic and adapting to changing.
All right. Yeah, exactly. Setting new goals and right. So I had a question about the role. I have two questions. One is the time horizon question, and this idea of stress and anxiety and not feeling productive enough, and maybe feeling like you're stressing out and having anxiety about things in class because of the fact that you're doing this at home. We have these other obligations that are sort of on top of you at the same time. And I'm wondering what types of activities are more problematic, the kind of more frequent short time horizon assignments weekly, for example, or if this sort of manifests in more problematic ways with longer, semester long projects. And I know we're sort of only halfway through the semester, so maybe it's hard to speak to the semester long project, but just in general, I'm just curious about the kind of duration, like should we all be assigning shorter term, smaller projects, like sort of chunking up the assignments, or should we be thinking about more long-term, like not immediate deadline oriented projects? I don't have the answer to that, but I'm curious what everyone's perspectives are on that. Maybe I'll just leave it at that one question for now.
I think in my opinion, and I think this definitely depends on the student too. I think you can have both, but I think if you have a long-term assignment, what always helps me is breaking it up into separate smaller assignments so you get a finished product at the end. So just like if it's a big paper, have like your literature review or your outline due along the way, which I think a lot of people do anyway, but maybe breaking that down even more just to, I think the thing with a long-term project, in my opinion, is now since we're so much more disconnected, or students might feel disconnected from the professor, it could feel kind of just like looming over them and they don't really know where to start or what to do. So in my opinion, I think you could still have long projects, but breaking it up into smaller chunks, to me, that seems like what I would prefer.
Allison.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I completely agree with Nick. But it also brings up his point with pride. Like if you compartmentalize projects more, you'll have more pride as a student, or at least that's how I feel. And it's lost. Like that was a really good point with Nick, because when you hand in a project or a paper, like physically, like I always had more pride with that. Like, oh, you can grade that now, like professor, like when you just submit it on campus, it's not a big deal, it doesn't feel as impactful. And yeah, so, just getting more pride in ourselves in general, I think is good. Yeah.
I was going to add something if that's okay. I know I've been talking quite a bit. But yeah, definitely agreeing with Nick. And I think, something that's always been difficult for me is presentations. So I've had this issue where I stress over this presentation, I don't sleep, whatever. So I think breaking up into pieces, especially like as Nick was saying, like maybe do a slide a day, maybe just practice it once today. Even though it's still going to be stressful, but at least you feel more prepared in how you're going to go about it. And in class, actually, in one of the classes I'm in right now, we don't present to the whole class. We only present to 2 or 3 other students. And, we're still learning how to give that information to other people and have practice doing presentations, but it's not nearly as much pressure.
That's really helpful input from everyone. And I'm glad that Maron is helping us record this, because I am definitely going back to take notes and learn how to improve, right? Teaching and learning and coping. But again, in interest of time, I think it's helpful to move forward. And Mandy, thank you for being here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for thinking about me and my sort of unique role here. And I really especially want to thank the 3 other panelists for sharing sort of everything that I'm thinking, and for also just being willing to be so vulnerable, in front of screens of people that we've never met before. That's personally, that has been my biggest challenge this semester. I graduated in May, so I only at that point was taking my final practicum class. So I wasn't even really on campus that much, but I was working as a TA with Chris in my 3rd semester. And that really was the hardest part for me, was saying goodbye to the students, especially the students who had to fly home to Kuwait or to Saudi Arabia, or, they were, their lives were upended, even more so than ours in certain ways. So I knew at the end of last year I was going to be teaching these classes this fall. So I really was thinking a lot about, how can I create and maintain relationships through a computer screen, because that's not something that I'm really good at. I'm a person who likes energy, and I want to be in a room and see how you feel. And when I chose that my classes, I wanted them to be in person, and I was told they couldn't be, I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do here? So I've really just, thinking about preparing for this talk today, I've just sort of been thinking about the last, few months, and I've just asked myself a lot of questions. And really in my preparation for today, that's what I did. I wrote down a lot of questions. Like, how can I make the screen feel more like a real academic environment? I too have used breakout rooms. I use Mentimeter every single day in my Intro to Environmental Science class. I both take attendance that way. I check to see if students have done their reading, and I give them an exit quiz every day to make sure that they were listening during the lecture. But I mean, is that something that makes the students, feel good about the semester, or does it feel like I'm micromanaging them? Like, to me, I'm trying to build community and I'm trying to be engaging, but does it feel like that? It's really hard for me to tell. And at the same time, I want to build trust, I want to nurture relationships with students, and how do I let them know that I'm there to support them? Like Nick was saying, it's so much easier to take advantage of conversations or services if they're in person. If you walk by them every day, if they're down the hallway from you, if you know you're going to see that person on Wednesday night or something. But when every day is the same, and when we don't know one another, how comfortable do we feel reaching out, or do we know that we even can? And so that's really been my biggest struggle, and letting the students know that, like, this is hard for me too. Like, I am your instructor right now, but I just was a student, and I'm a student every day because I'm still learning how to reach you and how to make myself better so that you can learn and you can leave this class, being more informed and more educated and having skills and techniques that you need. I've been taking some notes while I was listening to everybody, just to sort of share some things that I have changed through the semester. When I began, I wanted to do breakout rooms every day. In one of my classes, they work very well. So I should explain, one of my classes is an intro class and one of my classes is a graduate level class. So I have very different kinds of students that I'm teaching. So I have to think about that when I'm planning my lessons. The graduate level students, don't mind the breakout groups. They like it. They come back together. Everybody participates. But in my intro class, we go into breakout rooms and students disappear. They leave the class. They don't want to talk. I have given them polls to find out if they like breakout rooms. Some students say yes, but in general, a lot of them say no. And so I am just trying to, like you all have said, take feedback, try to see what the students need, but understand that not every class is the same. Like it needs to be, it's not one size fits all. And so I've really learned that I need to be super flexible. As other people have mentioned, I use Mentimeter. It's really beneficial for me. I don't have to worry about taking attendance when the students are right there. I can just look at it later. And I can also go back and look at how they answer questions and see if there's something that is missing, or if there is a group of students that I need to reach out to, for example, because they just maybe didn't get it. I also have used in my breakout rooms collaborative Google Slides presentations, and then had students either come back together as a class and share out, or post them in discussion boards and engage that way. So that's a way that I've been trying to sort of engage community, which is nice for me because I can then go, to the different breakout rooms and look at the discussion board and see sort of how students are engaging with one another, since I can't see it in real life. I have always done I've always given detailed feedback, because I don't think that it's valuable to just give a student a grade if they don't understand what exactly they didn't do well or what they did poorly. But now I've been giving even more detailed and more specific, both positive and negative feedback. I always start with positive feedback and then just a little bit of this is how you get better, just so that they know that, I'm spending time and I really am looking at their work and it matters and I want them to improve. These are the things that you can do better. I feel like my office hours have become counseling sessions. I had a study group before an exam, 5 students showed up and we just talked about what was going on in the world. It wasn't really even about the class. And I really like that. And I'm glad that I've been able to connect with a few students, that feel comfortable enough joining, me in those times and sharing things with me. One of my students right now is her family, her and all of her siblings are DACA recipients, and they're in the process of having to deal with some pretty intense immigration stuff. And then their mom just had a stroke. And so, there's just a lot going on for people. And that's just one, of hundreds of our students. Just understanding that like everybody that we're dealing with, that we have in our classes could be dealing with something like that, and we just don't know it. And so trying to do our best to just be open, and just let students know that we're people too. And we want to talk to you and we want to hear from you. Yeah, I don't think I added anything at all. I'm really glad that I got to hear what other people had to say. And I'm glad that I got to sort of think about this both as a, student and, I'm learning to do what I do in a new way, but also, as a first-time instructor. So I don't know. I hope that was helpful.
Thanks, Mandy. Questions?
Mandy, how are you facilitating like open discussion with your students regarding like personal issues? Because I feel in my lab section, I've tried several times to make that space for my students, but none seem to be taking me up on it.
Yeah, I mean, you can't force somebody to talk to you, right? So what I do is at the end of every class, I always, ask at the beginning how everybody's doing. And, like Tom said the other day, sometimes nobody says anything, but sometimes people speak up. But always at the end of class, I'll let people know sort of, if you're done, if you have no questions, you're free to go, but I'm here to stick around. And inevitably, there's always one or a few students who stick around. Some of them just want to know what the others are going to ask. Some of them want to talk to me privately, and they'll wait until, the other students sort of leave. It doesn't happen every day, but it happens once a week at least. And it's, I was really proud. A student reached out to me and asked if I would write him a recommendation letter. And I haven't even met him in person. I've just met him online over the last few months, but it felt good to know that he knew he could count on me. And it felt good for me to know that I, had a student who was enjoying class and that felt like I supported him, because it's so hard to tell that through a screen, even if the camera's on, I don't know if I helped at all, but also Marley, sort of like what Amanda was saying earlier, I feel I tend to maybe share a few personal things, but then what happens is, then students can connect with you and they'll send you a message or they'll send you a chat and they'll be like, hey, that reminds me of this thing, or, I do that too. And, I don't know, I don't have a perfect answer. That's just what I'm trying to do and think about what I would want if I was a student.
Can I comment on, oh, sorry. Can I comment on, Mandy, what you said about sort of reading people's response and reaction to your teaching? This goes for all of us, both many of you as students, but also as instructors or teachers. Because I think one of the things I went into this whole online teaching, distance learning thing with was the question of, was this concern that when I'm teaching in a classroom, I can read the room. And reading the room is really important for knowing when to stop an assignment or stop an exercise or to carry something, continue it on, because you can tell people are engaged, or you can tell people are bored, so you sort of end, or you can tell that maybe, maybe there's sort of acrimony brewing in the classroom and you better sort of work to tamp it down. Like all those things you can tell oftentimes, not just through the conversation, but through body language and through other cues and signals that it's hard to get through Canvas. And so I'm wondering, I don't have an answer to this. I'm posing this as a question, but I'm curious if others along the lines that Mandy was talking about have figured out ways to read the room and to read cues. I know that polling sounds like that's a way to do it, which I don't do. And Mentimeter, basically asking people, so maybe I'm answering my own question here. Is that the way to do it? Is the way to kind of read the room to basically just ask? I don't know. I'm curious what other people, what everyone thinks about that, because that's what I still find to be really challenging. Like, am I just droning on too long? And if I was in a classroom with you, I could tell that I was, but I can't in this format.
I mean, that's a good question. I have a few answers and I don't know if they'll work for you. I always build in, when I'm creating my presentations, places to stop and ask questions so that students are engaging. So I make sure, and if I don't do that, I'm going to forget. So I will put in my slides, stop, go to Mentimeter, or stop, breakout room. And then I remember what I'm doing. But I also turn on the emojis. And so students can give me thumbs up, thumbs down, love, and they feel real confident doing it because I don't know who it comes from. And so they will use those tools. And also, like somebody mentioned, I always keep my chat open. So students will give me feedback. And like Tom said, I won't type the answer. I'll just speak it out loud. I'll just say the answer to the question out loud to the whole class. So, but I think that the answer kind of is, yeah, that's how we have to read the room, because, how can we even tell if something acrimonious is happening when no students are even in the same room together? It's really, it's hard. I mean, you just have to find tools that work, I guess. I'm really curious to hear what other people think.
Amanda?
Thanks, Mandy. That was awesome. I do a couple different things, and it's very much like what Mandy was talking about, but I will stop and ask different questions that sort of speaks to what both Nick and Maggie were talking about. Just the fact that we're in people's living rooms and they're thinking about other things. And so I may ask a question. I happen to teach world regional geography. So there's always things going on around the world, and it might not be a class about, like an intro to GIS, we'll talk about some things that happened around the world. And so students can engage on something that, again, and I think Nick brought this up, it doesn't have to feel like a test. It doesn't have to feel, or I'll say, who cleaned their bathroom this week? Right? Or did everybody brush their teeth this morning? Because this is stuff that we're, quite honestly, I mean, I live by myself, and this is stuff that we're forgetting to do because, right, this place that I sit and I'm talking to you right now is the same place I eat. It's the same, right? And if you don't live with other people, which sometimes you all have roommates, but some of you are living on your own, it sort of becomes this thing where you can engage, and it doesn't have to be, how's your mental health today, right? But cleaning your bathroom is a big part of mental health, as is brushing your teeth, as is brushing your hair, or whatever personal habits that you have that we all should be continuing to do, that I know, I'm not going to ask that question right here, but I know that we've all neglected some of those things. So that's how I sort of have been engaging with students to think about your question, Gregory, of sometimes it's just taking a mental break to bring people back into whatever you're talking about, so that they feel comfortable. Because I find that I just check out sometimes, even when I'm, lecturing, I just I'm like, where am I? What am I doing? Or maybe I'm the only one that happens to. So anyway. But thank you. I think it's so interesting to me how all of these things that you guys have talked about touch on these such important issues.
It's funny, but and Gregory, that's a really great question too, because I struggle with precisely those things. And I think I struggle a lot in particular because, and it's actually this very panel that has made me think about it. I think I struggle with reading body language and bringing people together in sort of an online format, because I think my greatest strength as an instructor is my ability to bring people together in those in-person spaces, right? And so when I think about what I do and what I can do in an online format, it's completely negated the very thing that I can do that sort of affirms my own self-worth as an instructor. That's been completely taken away. And so it's not only about my ability to read the classroom, it's about my ability to tell myself that I am able to do what I'm supposed to do. There's this sense of, I think my own self-esteem has dropped precipitously, in part because there's no way to validate the things that I know I do well. Right, and that's missing when I don't have this in-person, in-class sort of ability to recognize acrimonious relationships, or to sort of decide how to broach a topic it's been really challenging. So it's one of those where I think this pandemic has, at least for me, helped me rethink what I need to do differently, perhaps when all of this is behind us as well. So thought I'd share that as well.
Yeah, and I agree with those sentiments for sure, Brian. So looking at the time, right, I was just kind of, I was thinking, Brian, maybe if we have a pretty small group here. I'm just thinking maybe we could forego the breakout group kind of concept and maybe continue this broader discussion. Is that what you're thinking as well?
Yeah, I left the breakout rooms behind a long time.
Yeah, okay. So, right, think on your feet, right? So, but I do want to leave a little bit of space for sure for each of the graduate students in particular who are here that were not panelists to essentially put put yourselves in the shoes of a panelist, right? And kind of think, have an opportunity to essentially describe something, and I'll leave it up to you essentially, but something about a success that you've had or a challenge that you've had that maybe you have a slightly different take, for example, than some of the other discussion that has been had here. I will also put in a plug for the concept that I was discussing before, which is kind of like the broader, whether the department, right, could develop some kind of broader initiatives or something else that or programs or something that could help with some of those challenges or to enable you to have more successes, for example. So I know that that's a lot, but essentially there's three options there, right? Successes, challenges, or some kind of broader topic that anybody who, you know, hasn't had a chance to kind of put yourselves in the shoes of a panelist, you know, this might be your opportunity to kind of do that. Just make sure to leave some space for that. So not to put people on the spot, I guess, but is there any of those sentiments out there that anybody would like to share? Especially those graduate students who haven't had a chance to weigh in yet.
Yeah, I can say something.
Great, Jade.
So I'm a first year MS student, and I'm also a lab instructor. So teaching remotely for the first time, and also being a student remotely for the first time, and also living by myself in a 1-bedroom apartment, and I just moved to Denver. So all of these have been really big challenges. I think a success would be today, hearing everyone talk and just knowing that I'm not alone and everyone else is feeling these same feelings has been really helpful. And as a teacher too, like all the other instructors or teachers seem to be having the same kind of difficulties with their students. So yeah, I think today was a success for me, and it is like those small victories. So yeah, thank you to all the panelists, you guys, all the talks were great.
Yeah, I can chime in too, because I feel similar to Jade. I'm a lab instructor as well. I'm a first year MA student. I guess when you're in person in class, you kind of get a feel about how other students are doing, not just in their personal lives, but with their classes and stuff too, because you kind of like to like talk to each other and complain about certain things and stuff before class or right after class ends and stuff. So it's kind of hard to get a feel for like, oh, is this a challenging assignment for everyone, or am I just really like struggling, or with any of the other things that have to do with COVID and working from home and things like that. So I found this really helpful to share our challenges together, because it makes, yeah, like Jade said, we're all kind of dealing with the same stuff. And I had the feeling that would help. And last week in our lab that I instructed, I just had a quick wellness check and kind of was vulnerable a little bit with my students about how it's kind of challenging for me too, because I was like reminding them that I'm also a student and struggling my coursework and stuff like that. And so I was able to, I feel like, connect with them more than I have before in other classes. Just you know, at the beginning, I always try to ask them how they're doing, if they did anything fun over the weekend. And a lot of times it's just like nothing, super awkward. But I feel like that was like just being vulnerable kind of opened up the conversation and helped a lot. So.
Yeah, that's great. So thank you both for those sentiments. We appreciate hearing that. And certainly kind of commiserate with you a little bit, right? Especially on some of the things that you're saying there. So some other thoughts? Anybody else that didn't have a chance?
I guess I have like an affirmation, sort of. As far as like having the camera off, I try to like, sorry, I'm like backtracking quite a bit, but as far as like having the camera off for class, I know that sometimes it's nice to have the camera off because like I'm still paying attention, I promise, but it's just like I don't get distracted by looking at other people, and I might have just gotten back from a run and I feel like I look awful. So it's not necessarily, at least in my case, that I'm not paying attention or that I'm uncomfortable. It's just the fact that like sometimes I am having one of those days where it just like feels nice to not have to like mentally be there, but I'm still taking in what's being said, if that makes sense. Because all of the like we are, again, like it was said earlier, we are in a place that we are sleeping, eating, doing school, doing work, things like that. When I'm not in class, it's kind of been hard to, like if I do have free time, I realize I do have to get out of the house, because if I'm sitting at home and I have free time, I'm like, this is really suspicious. What am I missing and what should I be catching up on? And so in that aspect, I do feel like sometimes it's nice to have my camera off because my mind is running on all that different stuff, and that I have to sit there and like focus in on taking my notes rather than having my mind running about all the things that I have to get done because I feel anxious. So.
Yeah, for sure. So exactly. All right. Let's see, any other thoughts out there?
Well, hi. I just say, I think everyone's in a period of grief right now about, what our graduate experience, our expectations were, and what we're dealing with, and all the grief in the world, and the unimaginable political situation that, I don't know. I didn't expect it to arrive in my lifetime, but I've seen this thing coming a long time, and now it's, I don't know. It's a time of grieving, so I think they're really good tools for coping with grief. One is gratitude. If you can find, rekindle your spiritual practice, whatever that looks like, around gratitude and forgiveness. That helps me a lot. I work with that with my family sometimes, where we don't get along or have conflicts. That is to say, and if it's possible to cultivate humor in a way that's supportive to you rather than at somebody's expense. And then writing letters to loved ones, that's just a little thing I do. Doesn't take much time, and then I get it accomplished, put a stamp on it. It's really old school, and it makes them so happy. It makes me so happy. So it's so old school, but I think there's something pre-modern about it that is beneficial to unplug. And so these are techniques. And then I know others who benefit from crafts or knitting or, completing something. I guess I do that with preparing meals, but playing instrument, or, kind of moving that energy out and finding some productive artistic expression. So those are my go-to non-counseling mental health breaks, and trying to put the grief in perspective, and being so grateful to be in school and to be in a community of people who are concerned about same issues and are brilliant and are committed and want to share and to make a difference is just really meaningful to me. So that helps me keep centered in that rather than in, say, less supportive narratives on the political scene or otherwise that are really debilitating if I focus my energies there. So try to just limit that and recenter where I can and take breaks. Thank you for this great discussion. I'm sorry to ramble on.
No, that's great. I mean, I think that there's a lot of merit in all of the things that you just said, in the sense of, maintaining some kind of, you know, hobby and those types of things, and then also staying very much connected to the people, you know, that are outside of the kind of small confines in which we find ourselves in these days, right? And I guess one last question that I have for you, and then maybe we'll go back to Brian for some closing thoughts here. But I guess I'm curious from the students in particular, what you all are doing to stay connected to each other, right? So presumably we, you know, as the instructors, we sit kind of, and we assign you group projects, and we assign you homeworks, which normally maybe you would meet together for, you know, in some kind of space on campus for, you know, 10 or 15 minutes even sometimes, to just kind of go over the concepts a little bit individual or together as like a small group or something. And a lot of that has been kind of decimated now, right? Like you're never just going to run into each other in the hallway and say, hey, how is it going with the, you know, with that homework or something. And so I'm curious about whether or not you all are connecting to each other in some way outside of class to still engage in those types of activities where you're just checking in with each other, checking in with your learning from each other, etc.
I think that being a second year and having been in the department before this happened sort of gives, I think, second year sort of a leg up on that, because I know people from the before times. So it's, for me, it's easy to, and I'm in classes with some of them, so it's easy to maintain those connections, I think, and we'll get together and study for a quiz or just hang out and things like that. But I'm interested to hear from any of the first years if they've been able to make that connection, because that's something that I'm missing definitely, is I haven't met a lot of the first years. It's like a whole half the department.
Somebody else can go. I'm a first year. It was very difficult, not gonna lie. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't really understand how I was going to connect with other people when I'm not sitting next to somebody necessarily. Not going in, not knowing any of the professors, nothing like that. I tend to use humor, and sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. Just maybe getting on the same topic as somebody, and maybe just like sending something in the chat about like something they said in class that was awesome, or commenting on something like that. I think that has helped a lot, but it's also a process, so we'll see.
Yeah, so is there something that we could do as a department, right, to kind of like facilitate that process? So for example, if we opened up a Zoom room, like, you know, once a day at a particular time, and it's essentially the equivalent of a, you know, of a graduate student kind of, you know, where we had graduate student offices or kind of collective spaces where graduate students would come together, and, you know, they'd periodically be in there, like kind of office space or something, almost kind of just a space where you can either, you know, type to somebody in the chat, hey, I'm going to be there today, or will you be there today, or just go and see if there's anybody there to just chat with, or see how things are going or something. Is that, I mean, is with worthwhile endeavor, or is that not something that people would take advantage of?
I think it's definitely worthwhile. I like that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. I think it's also important to have something like a topic or a game or something like that. And also just having incentive just to be there. I don't know what kind of incentive that would be, but sometimes it's easier to not show up and do something like that rather than put your time towards something else. So maybe, I don't know. I don't know. Just a couple ideas. I don't know.
Yeah, and I was just even thinking, like, you know, a space where where you may be able to kind of meet people to interact with regard to certain projects or with regard to your homework for that particular week, or, and maybe as instructors, we could remind people that that space is available. And if you want to interact with each other, that there's a spot to go or something, something like that, right? Like, make it a little bit more tangible in the sense that it's not, I mean, it certainly could be just somewhere where you go chat or something with people, but it also could be a place where you're actually like a designated time and space where you're like, can check in with your colleagues from class and maybe get some help on homework or something like, I don't know. But anyway, it's something to explore. So.
Actually, another question following that is in terms of ideas for how maybe the department could help students. Do you think having an official sort of mentoring program might be helpful, where you have one second-year student paired with the first-year student, randomly, for example, and that pair sort of works together for one semester where both check in with each other and just bounce questions and ideas around with no formal commitment, other than to know that there's someone looking out for you. Do you think something like that would be helpful?
So Brian, we actually have something like that in the works. It was initiated by the graduate school. So I think in the graduate school's orientation, the school-wide orientation, they had first-year students sign up for mentorship, and now it's our job to pair them up with students. So we've collected names of first years and second years, and I'm in the process of connecting people with each other.
That's great. Thanks, Maron.
Yeah.
Yep. And also, we are having another game night.
Yeah.
We're kind of organizing it, so it's coming. So look out for that. In terms of having sort of a purpose or reason to come together. But I do recognize what Tom's getting at, which is this idea of, just an informal space where, for example, if you were, in other words, there's a space. I mean, I don't know if a Zoom channel room has to be created for this, but I'm imagining those of you interested in a book club. Well, okay, so I've seen a couple notes here. Jade, Sarah said that sounds great. Well, I'm sure there's others who would like to be involved with that. So how do you actually turn that idea into an actual meeting that you do every month or something? And so we just want to help facilitate that. So perhaps having that open room, every day from 3 to 4 that just opens up and anyone can just log in and get in there and with a password or something to have a conversation about, for example, putting a book club together. That might be one way to do that. But we definitely want to facilitate these interactions because we're very aware that, and I've said this many times before, that, the sense of community that we attempt to build, that we try to build, and I think successfully build in our department, is one of the strengths. And so, as one of our strengths. And so to not have that is to strip away sort of a key element of who we are and who you guys are. And so that's a shame. And so we're trying to do small things to rebuild that for this semester and, next semester, most likely.
Can I recommend for a standing chat room kind of thing, Microsoft Teams? I think you can create like a room in Microsoft Teams. I know we have a GES faculty one that nobody really uses, but it's there if we need it. I think that would be a good idea for the graduate students as well.
And I think a format where, as opposed to having the host or co-host, be able to put people in rooms, anyone can just self-select and go, if there's 6 people in the room and you're talking about something and 3 people are like, let's talk about the book club, but we can't talk over everyone else. Let's create our own room and just sit in that room and talk about the book club while the other 3 people are in the other room.
Right.
And it's very fluid in that way. You can just kind of move back and forth. That would be, I think, ideal.
Yeah.
However we can do that.
Okay.
This is great. Tom, do you think maybe we should wrap the panel up?
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, we could do a kind of a rolling approach where essentially, certainly if you need to leave, of course, you can do so. If you still have a few things that you want to make sure to kind of get out there in the open, I feel like certainly Ryan and I and anybody else that can stick around for that. So this is kind of, Mandy's idea of essentially, okay, class is over, but if anybody else wants to stick around, you can, and chat with us in smaller groups or individually or something. So, so yeah, absolutely. If you need to head off, I think that's certainly appropriate. We meant to end by 5. The discussion has been really engaging and really, really helpful from the kind of like the departmental perspective. I mean, we could not ask for kind of better ideas and thoughts and the kind of innovative aspects of this teaching and learning, this new teaching and learning ideas that or a concept that we have to encounter these days or kind of broach, I guess. We couldn't have asked for kind of better sentiments in those regards. So we just really appreciate everybody's ideas and your willingness to share. And as was mentioned before, be vulnerable in the sense of like, tell us how things are really going so that we can actually try to put together some initiatives that might actually help with those challenges. So.
Thanks, Tom. And again, just to really quickly end off, I think our department is really only as strong as the people in it. And I really want to give a big hand out to all of you, and particularly to our presenters who are here today. And thank you, Jade, for bringing up that point, because I think this is one of those things that I will keep with me, right? As I move forward through the pandemic to sustain myself. And I think we need more of these, not panels necessarily, but we need more opportunities to come together as a group. So hang in there. You're not alone. And again, we'll be around for a little bit after this panel. So feel free to stay and chat, but have a great weekend, everyone. Stay healthy. And it's good to see faces I haven't seen in a while as well. So